I'm glad to meet you all. My name is Maksym. I'm working with the InText company, and last year in 2019 I was working on implementation of machine translation in our company. For us specifically, at the start of this road, we've identified several goals. First and foremost, the highest priority one is to get prepared to the increase of the volumes. So, because we were assuming that this volume of machine translation is going to increase, user-provided machine translation, private use machine translation has huge volumes at the moment, and it keeps growing. It includes like buying stuff on the internet, usage of foreign services, and we were assuming that this will also get into the industry or technical translation and will affect it. Also, another task was to adapt our processes to machine translation, because this working with machine translation is quite different from working with normal translation. We have quite a few questions there: what engines to use, how to assess them, how to determine them, who fits this task, and so on and so on. And the third one is to understand the criteria. So what job is going to use which approach. So these are like warm-up slides. We'll go to the to answer the Leonid's question later, but at the moment those are just headings from our presentation. On the left-hand side, you can see some admin ideas. On the right-hand side, you can see ideas regarding regarding working with the engines. So for us, we've selected to work with machine translation. We've agreed to work with machine translation only if the client approves. That's the transparency approach. That's the safety approach. It's the client who makes the decision. In this area, there are really strict NDA requirements, and it would not be right to use machine translation without client's approval. We only stick to these decisions and this solution and nothing else. This is quite different from the standards in our industry, like from the post-editing of machine translation. In our opinion, it's more of a translation rather than editing. Why is that? To achieve high-quality translation, we need to use two pairs of eyes. And for a machine translation, it cannot be viewed as a pair of eyes of its own, because it supplements the first person who deals with the translation. Because there's a human factor. A translator can make a mistake, an editor can make a mistake, and the machine translation assists us with it's used like a safety net and an assistance to the translator. And the third approach is, if the machine translation fails, we need to pay the translator at his full rate. That's quite straightforward, that's logical, that's also a responsibility of the company. You cannot fully shift this responsibility to the translator, because eventually people will just keep declining these tasks if you don't have consistent views with them on this task. So it's a long-term solution. It seems to be correct and right. Jumping ahead, there were quite a few cases. There were really few cases when we made a mistake and the machine translation was complete rubbish and we had to pay the full rate. As for working with engines, it's the length of segments that is of importance. The segments that are too short or too long, they don't work too well. The short ones fail with the machine translation because the machine would not be able to understand what industry, what area these segments refer to, and after using these programs, normally the results are quite weird. One point to mention that if an engine is trained, you can rectify this issue. As for the long segments, a machine translation engine would often fail to understand the connection between the start of the sentence and the end of the sentence. So, issues in the source. This is something that I've never thought about before earlier. If you make a mistake or a typo, a couple of typos in the source text, the machine brain would explode and it would lead to weird results. So we had a case following matrix. We had two typos. The first word was missing one of the L letters. The second word was missing the R letter, and it led to such results as a working ATM machine or something else. At best, the machine would transliterate the text if it failed to understand the text. What comes from this? If there's an intermediary language, the usage of machine translation will have difficulties. For example, if the text wasn't written in English but it was produced as an English translation from Chinese, this will lead to questions. When it comes to the translator, if for a human translator, it doesn't seem to be a big problem. It just will be a minor issue. For a machine translation, it will be a huge issue. Another point is tags. Tags will also lead to issues. Alexander had this similar case in his presentation when a cut tool tag was considered as a sentence slicer, sentence separator, and it would translate a single sentence as two separate sentences. More advanced engines don't have this issue, but the simpler engines have this issue. Also, you need to consider the fragmentary way of thinking of a machine. That results in a different style in two different segments that are close to each other. That's when we are using a cat tools again. Also, the usage of terminology, consistency of terminology. Sometimes a machine would translate a term in a different way to the way that it used 5 sentences before. And the third one, the last point is abnormalities are unavoidable. For a person, it's normal to make a mistake, like confusing 15 with 5 because he's tired or she's tired or something else. We were expecting for the machines to not having this problem, but they still do have those problems. For example, DeepL had an issue when instead of a translation, it would start writing blah 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 blah. I think that comes from results from teaching a machine engine from the core. But still, you cannot avoid those mistakes. Another point I'd like to mention is the issue of quality in the machine translation. All these 3 points they come from the single idea. The machine translation world is now developing with leaps and bounds, and you cannot apply some sort of one-time analysis results as final, as something set in stone, because in half a year some engines might become more advanced, other engines might stagnate. You have to keep reanalyzing and reassessing. Another really important point is there is a look like we hope to assess the machine translation by using the assessment of those people who do the job. Initially, it's possible to do that, but still, this lacks objectivity, impartiality of a person, because if a person is in a bad mood, he or she can produce different assessments. Initially, I was lacking like a starting point to assess whether a translator assesses machine agents consistently. For this approach, we've used the editing distance. It's a Levenstein number. If you use a scientific term, it considers the number of corrections that you need to do to produce a text from another text, and it's an indicator of how useful was the initial text. It's the sign. It's an indicator of the effort spent. It might be sort of an indirect quality point, but it's not directly involved. It's not direct. It doesn't reflect the quality directly, because an editor can make his mistakes of his own and erroneous corrections of his own. But still, it might be reflective of something, of the effort. To use this editing distance indicator, it needs the translator or the editor has to understand the task clearly, because if a person thinks that this is machine translation, I'm going to completely rewrite it, this will lead to a really low score for editing distance. But if he considers that some of the changes are really not needed, machine translation is good at some points, the score would be higher. We've added this just for just for sake of interesting. We've added this same score for translators, so that they know how useful their text was for the translators.
So which way do we receive this distance? First, it is the plugins, the very easy ways: Qualitivity, SODXIFE, post-edit compare. When we were beginning this, I took these plugins, I was generating the reports, I was collecting the indicators and entered them for the work. But still, there is a big but in this question. There are some complications. The first one is the problems with starting, with running. I didn't manage to run the post-edit compare in my computer, in my laptop. It doesn't work in many cases. There are several forums discussing the solution of this decision. Just some people have it working, some people do not. It's quite complicated with the settings, quite complicated to achieve it. SDL sleeve compare is also complicated in obtaining the edit distance. For us to extract it, we need to make a report in XML, then we have to download it, then we have to reload it, and it's a very big fuss and lots of extra activities for us to do. So we do not like to do this. We prefer it to make it easy and simple. And we noticed that when we were using SDLSX compare, we come across the estimation of the translator, which was not very positive. What our conclusions were out of this? We created our own program. We started our own casino. So what we did, we collected all the notes, all the wishes, all the people's remarks which were related to edit distance, and we also have the function of comparison, which is included in the program, which indicates the automatic comparison of editor to translator. So we were trying to improve all the mechanisms that we needed. The program can compare the threads packages. So we don't need to extract a sleeve separately. We don't need to select them. The program will find it itself and will compare it. We don't need even to name the files. We also improved the edit distance formula. Referring back to the previous slide, divergence with the translator's opinion may be connected with the fact that all those plugins, they determine the formula of edit distance segmentarily. As we were doing it at the first stages, we were taking just the first notion and introduce them into the text. But that is wrong because different segments are of different lengths. If the translator takes one length, the indicator will be 50%, and the correction of mistakes will be of different size. If we take some middle sizes, there will be also some complications, 85 or anything else. So this was the key problem of the key reason of such divergences. And when we improved the formula, we received the following results. We managed to form the net which coincides with the translator's opinion, and we were able to draw the following criteria. If that is 50, that is quite useful. 50, that is quite of low use. If that is 50, 60, that is of average. More than 60, that is quite useful. Roughly saying, 80% of our works were useful machine translations, which means that we determine the typicality is quite right, we choose the proper engines for the typicalities, and our translators and editors work pretty good. They are able to use the appropriate approach to the machine translation. What I want to explain about the 14%, which is rather helpless. It's a very interesting mechanism. Within this 14%, the majority of works, more than 50% of works, are the orders from several customers who choose the engines themselves. They are the one who choose them. We don't participate in that, and they are sending us their engine themselves, which doesn't perform well as a rule, as a confirmation that our definition works pretty good. So, what do we do with the distance as final? We compare it with the translator's evaluation. We shouldn't disregard the translator's evaluation because it is a kind of indicator allowing to correct the activity. We also made records of edit distance work. Each translator's profile has also some indicators of its work in correlation with the translator's work. As finally of this accounting of these records, we consider what was wrong, why, and what are the conclusions. Sometimes it's just simply the change of the engines. Maybe we should change it into something else, into another engine. Maybe better education, we should improve education. Maybe we should just refuse from the project and just to recommend the client act in a quite different way. Maybe it's quite inappropriate for the person who has been working with the constant or as a constant client, constantly ordering something from us. Maybe it's just not suitable approach for him. It's quite okay. Not everybody finds the machine translation suitable for themselves. When we have already processed something, or actually better to say during the processing and fixing of the edit distance, in order not to keep all that information, not to keep all our conclusions are just set, we make them automized. All those criteria in our TMS, we have a special robot. I'd better say it's a chatbot, a definite chatbot, who checks the orders criteria and gives some recommendations based on that. As in this example, he gave three recommendations. The order was quite big, and he gave recommendations to use the machine translation. As post-editing, the order was suitable for it, and this TMS assistant chose it. It was of a big volume, so this TMS assistant suggested a couple of ways of solutions. That is why, due to this automatization, we just fix these positive results, and we assist with the help of this TSM assistant. In order to sum up our achievements, that is saving the time of evaluation, because at the beginning the total time was 30 minutes for evaluation. Now it's about 10 minutes with the file attached. We receive just the results. And the demand for the machine translation, I think the result of this has grown from almost nothing, 0.01 to 1.5%. As you remember, I told you previously that machine translation would be of greater demand. This assumption was not confirmed. It wasn't. It was us who were insisting for the clients to let us apply machine translation, but we didn't feel it to be useful. We started growing our work in this stream, in this way. We are ready for the further development of it. We have elevated the technical side of this. And besides, I want to say that the translator's reaction while we were working at the project was rather positive on average. When we consider some figures, some numbers, so generally about 10% or even less of them refused to work with the machine translation. The other part, the bigger part, they did not decline such possibility to work. They were just waiting for us to properly prepare and to for us to elevate all the mistakes, and they were expecting us to pay them properly. What I want to say is that you can easily check the standards which are free to your access, and also the comparison tool program, which you can see as shown on the link. That is all about I wanted to say. What I want to wish you is to evaluate the machine translation properly, not to be afraid of it. It's just the technology of future which you should try to work with. Thank you for your attention. Maybe you have some questions. Thank you, Maksym, greatly. It's an amazing speech, very fascinating. Valia Kozlova, Correctarium. What I want to ask, what's next? You have just estimated one translation with the machine engine, the second, the third. What is the process in the final result? Thank you for the question. We are still mastering this mechanism, but the similar systems are applied for the analysis about half a year. We apply it to definite projects, make there some corrections. That is a planned activity for half a year. Vaslav Yehurnov. I will also be representing some information about machine translation a bit later. Just as two examples, whether it is applied from Ukrainian into Russian or other languages. No, three languages: Ukrainian, Russian, and English. We have tried to apply other languages, German, but we are not testing them so widely. Thank you for your report. We have a comment from Svetlana Svetova. Svetlana is writing, you have made a perfect speech. She has three questions. What are the language pairs and spheres do you use machine translation? That was actually the previous question, that is English, Ukrainian, Russian, and vice versa. As to the spheres, we didn't include the spheres which are widely used, but we were using those which are not used. We exclude aviation and pharmaceutics, and the other spheres are not excluded. I don't remember the gradation. Some of them are automatically considered, automatically tested, and the others are half manually, half automatically. As to the classification, we were trying to keep it quite contracted. As to the technical sphere, that may be some energetical sphere or any other, some valves, whatever, mathematics. The second question, machine translation is only on the client's consent. Does it mean that you were considering the cloud decision or the local? Just a second, what do you mean, the local? No, we do not consider the engines installed in own computers because they require a high capacity. We think the desk engines are applied at some further stages when there is the requirement for it, the demand. Nowadays it's just the cloud. And one more question, Maksym, please specify in-text translation tool. Do you consider it's possible to use it with SDL App Store to spread it this way? Actually, we initially had the plan for it, and I also want to appreciate Svetlana for her work. Leonid Glazichev, I have some remarks for those people. For those people who consider machine translation, I want to disappoint you. And two very short statements beginning with negation. First one, for everybody. Editing distance that doesn't tell anything about work efficiency. I have written the article that we should not use it. Please remember that. Why we shouldn't use it? Because it requires a very huge work from the translators who watch the source, the target. They just apply particle note, and they change and change it like this, and there is nothing for them to be paid for. And I want to make an example from the real life. We can tell about the same about the percentage of the translators, because there are two ways of translators' evaluation, which depend, and unfortunately nobody is talking about it. The first one, when you are applying machine translation for the final product result, just probably because you don't have the time, the money, the resources. This is the first time of evaluation. And the person who considers these factors, he says it's terrible. And the second, that is post-editing. While post-editing, dear gentlemen, you don't really care what the translator thinks watching this text. He can be cursing this time. It's not important. Important is the speed to which you apply for editing it. The most terrible mistakes are edited quite easily and quickly. It is very difficult to spot some things which are very smooth, which seem to be smooth. because there may be a change of sentences in the paragraphs in the abstract. She may alter in some other places. That is why we need to apply a great work. That is why the translator's opinion doesn't apply for the evaluation, because it may be rather subjective. Please do not apply any of these methods, they are pointless. Thank you for the comments. Actually, I agree with you. I have studied your system thoroughly. It's very interesting for me, but to my opinion, everything depends on who you work with. And on the stage when you work with other companies, edit distance as the basic one may be quite suitable. And I understand this your consideration that edit distance, it doesn't presuppose this process of thinking, the cognitive process, because it may be searching for a lot of time due to the fact that there may be just change in a couple of symbols. This is rather an average notion, rather an average indicator, just like the average temperature in the room. It means practically nothing. I would have agreed with you if there were quite huge divergences in thoughts. Okay, you can contradict me saying that the opinion doesn't mean anything. Actually, I have already told that. Please, let us be honest. Editing distance and other mentioned by you, use them for you to be paid less. And actually, this is the main aim. This is the main aim of it, and your aim is to explain to the client that the situation is quite different. It's rather more complicated than what they are thinking about. We are talking not about the quality of translation, but about the risks that may be in the customer's order while the machine translation applied. You should explain not the quality of translation, but the problem of risks, because any work with machine translation is the risk analysis. Thank you. It was understandable.
I have another question. Alexander Bondarenko from Translatel. My question is regarding the personnel that you are training for post-editing, if you're doing this. The performers, right? Yeah, so post-editors. I'll bring up an example. Just recently, we've held the summer school of translation and interpreting, and we were telling the young interpreters, newbies, main problems that they will encounter. And one of the points that was mentioned, they were saying that the machine translation is good for nothing. We're completely deleting that string, and we would completely rephrase it because we would say it a different way. And I'm taking a step back. I'm telling my students that you have a benefit, an advantage compared to experienced linguists. You can form that positive attitude towards the machine translation. And we were talking to my colleagues. I was talking to my colleagues yesterday, and I felt this lack of positive attitude towards the machine translation. How do you deal with this? Yes, this is a question familiar to me. It's an issue familiar to me. It's not only about experienced linguists and translators. It's about the technological process with the workflow. If it's an experienced expert, a professional that has been working for years, it's really difficult for him to change the tech, to switch to a different process. He's looking at the text and he thinks, right, I would have formulated it in a different way if I wasn't shown. I would have worded it in a different way and it wasn't shown as text. So with the experts, with the professionals that we're working with, they are quite receptive of it. Some of them mentioned that we are treating machine translation just like CAT tools. Sometimes some time ago, people were thinking like with CAT tools, interpreters will go obsolete, translators will go obsolete. But no, it became a huge tool for assistance, and I think the translation, the machine translation, is going a similar way. Fedor Bezrukhov, I have a question. Have you encountered the approach that Amazon uses when a translator gets paid not with a fixed rate, discounted rate, but depending on how many changes were introduced to a specific segment? For example, if there were more than 50% of changes, the segment is considered as completely written from scratch and no discount applies. If there are minimum changes, we're paying you close to 100% match. I wonder how popular this approach is. I think it's an interesting approach, but we've only encountered it once. Thanks for the question. We've never used this kind of approach. We use this metric as an indicator of whether something was, whether MT worked or not. We have a reduced rate for machine translation. It's, as far as I remember, 80% for no matches. Any other translation memory matches are taken from the normal rate, normal matches rate. So we do not consider the number of changes. What we're doing is, if there were too many changes, we're paying the full rate. If there were not too many changes, we're giving a discount. We're paying at a discount. But you've never received any such tasks from the clients? No. As I've mentioned before, we are the initiators of this suggestion. We are suggesting to use the machine translation, not the client. Yeah, we have another question, I think. Good morning, Igor. My name is Igor Bukharkov. I have two brief questions that might require long answers. The first one: how do you rate? What's your opinion of the machine translation in practice, even if considering that it fails with numbers sometimes? And another point that you mentioned: only 10% of translators have expressed their negative attitude towards machine translation. My question is, how did you ask them? Did you tell them that? Did you ask them, do you want to work with machine translation, or did you just tell them we're switching over to the MT, whether you want it or not? If you don't want it, don't work with us. Well, we didn't use any imperative statements because it's important for us to keep those professionals in our company, and we don't want to make them render the service that they don't want to. As for the quality with machine translation, its quality has grown rapidly and hugely. It has its own issues, but it's a working technology, and we need to use it. What I also like is how engines started to deal with advertisement text. Like if it's a advertisement in documents, in other stuff, they've even now really good with dealing with idioms. So the progress is quite visible. Thank you, dear gentlemen.